So this is Sunday, and on Sunday I tend to watch these talking head shows, and I don't know why, I just do. And I had the unfortunate experience of watching two of my least favorite people on the planet expound on their views of the Trump indictment, one of whom is Jim Jordan. Now, I've had a bone to pick with Jim Jordan in the first place because he's a graduate of The Ohio State University, which as a University of Michigan grad, I am honor bound to hate. So aside from that petty personal issue I have with him, this man is a garbage bin of verbiage that just comes shooting out of his mouth a mile a minute, saying nothing of any substance. And it's almost impossible for anybody to interview him because he just talks right over everybody. And I think he just likes the sound of his own voice. The other one is Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham is pitiful, and I got to tell you something. I have roots in the Air Force. My father was a bombardier navigator, highly decorated in World War II, but then he had a civilian career, he was a deputy attorney general, U.S. attorney. Then he went back in the military, and he retired as a full colonel, as the Judge Advocate General of the Air Force Communications Service, which means he was, in the line right below the Judge Advocate General of the Air Force in terms of the chain of command. Then after he retired, he was asked to stay on and continue to run that office for another couple of years, which he did with the civilian equivalent rank of a brigadier general. I worked for the Air Force, headquarters Air Force, but I was stationed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Ironically, I think I had the same desk that my dad had when he was worked for the Air Force during the Korean War. I was there during the Vietnam War, and had the civilian equivalent rank of a major, and I was a patent lawyer. So I have a lot of respect for the Air Force JAG Corps, mainly because of my dad, but also because of the people with whom I worked, all of whom were really highly committed, highly professional people, some of the best lawyers I've ever known. And I think I've mentioned before in this broadcast, my dad is the best lawyer I ever knew, and I've known a lot of very good lawyers in my career. So Lindsey Graham is Air Force JAG. He's in the reserves, and every time he opens his mouth, he embarrasses me as a former JAG lawyer myself. He's embarrassing, and he says the damnedest things. So today he was talking about the Trump indictment, and he was going on and on about how this is unfair. Look what happened with they let Hillary go, and Hillary's case has zero to do with the kind of behavior that Trump did. Hillary cooperated completely with the Justice Department in terms of the investigation they ran on her, which she did absolutely nothing illegal. And I say that as a lawyer who knows what he's talking about. I pay attention to these things. And Joe Biden, which again, there's zero evidence that Joe Biden did anything comparable to Trump. But he goes on, and he says most of the American people. He said most Americans, and then he paused for a second. And he said most Republicans believe that this has been a double standard and that Donald Trump is being treated unfairly by the Justice Department purely for political reasons. And I'm like, there you go. Every once in a while, a golden nugget of truth falls out of the mouths of even the most despicable characters. He's exactly right. Most Republicans, according to the polls, think that Donald Trump got a bad deal and that the Democrats got a walk, and this whole thing is political and has nothing to do with the merits of the case. Now, Republicans who are actual lawyers, who have actually read the indictment, I've seen a number of them interviewed, including Bob Barr, the former Attorney General appointed by Trump, have all said, well, when you read the actual particulars in here, it looks very bad. It looks as though Trump committed crimes. So Lindsey Graham gets on there, and first of all, he says that thing about most Republicans believe that, and I think he's right. The polls seem to indicate that. We'll see what the polls are going to indicate as much as information. Oops, what's that? Gotta stop. You know who is making noise, so I'm going to have to resume this with a, well, let me see. Okay, I'm sorry about that. Those of you who've watched this broadcast in the past know that my French bulldog, Francois Pierre, is a big fan of Donald Trump, so of course he's always tries to interrupt me anytime I say anything critical of Donald Trump or any Republican. That's just kind of typical. So, before we were rudely interrupted by the little French bulldog here, I was saying that Lindsey Graham, after saying most Republicans agree with that proposition, and the trouble with that is that happens all the time with Republicans. They hear some nonsense, especially on Fox News or from people like Graham or Jim Jordan, who get on there and spew this nonsense that any reputable lawyer knows is nonsense. There's nothing comparable between Hillary Clinton's personal email server in her house and what Donald Trump did with national defense documents prepared by people in the Defense Department that he stole and kept in his house when he had absolutely no right to do so, and that's a violation of the Espionage Act. Now, every lawyer who's a real lawyer knows that. So here's this character saying, well, most Republicans believe da-da-da, like that means it's true because most Republicans do it. That's just an indictment of most Republicans. Out of the mouths of babes sometimes come ugly truths. And that's an ugly truth that came out of the mouth of that babe. So, then he says, and this is in the interview, a lot of things that went on in this ridiculous interview with him, but he said, and I discussed this the other day if you watched my podcast on this question of the Presidential Records Act. So he was the person interviewing him, so, under the Presidential Records Act, the president's not entitled to keep these documents. And Lindsey Graham says, well, that's right, but he hasn't been charged with the violating of the Presidential Records Act, and whether they're supposed to be in the hands of the archives or not, it's not a criminal offense to not put them in the hands of the archives. And that's true. But the Presidential Records Act was not mentioned in the indictment. He says that as well. It wasn't mentioned in the indictment. Of course it's not mentioned in the indictment because that's not the crime of which he is accused. But his lawyer, before he got fired, said, and I saw him on TV saying, well, Trump had a right to these documents. He is obligated to keep these documents under the Presidential Records Act. Now, that guy was either a damn fool who shouldn't be practicing law, or he's a liar and he shouldn't be practicing law. And then I saw another lawyer on Fox News, one of these, I forget his name, but he's a regular legal commentator, said the same thing. The Presidential Records Act, well, that exonerates Trump completely. And of course, it does just the opposite. It says that when the president leaves, the documents are supposed to be in the possession of the National Archives, not the president. But the criminal charge wasn't that he kept them from the National Archives. It's that he was holding on to documents which contained information regarding the national security. And you can see from that indictment, I assume by now you've all read it, it's like 43 pages. He had things involving nuclear weapons. He had things involving the Iran proposed possible order, things that was prepared by Milley. All kinds of information in there regarding national security. And he's not allowed to keep those, and keeping those is a crime. That has nothing to do with classification. It doesn't matter if he classified or declassified anything, which is another thing they keep saying. Well, he declassified, he had the right to declassify. It doesn't matter whether he had a right to declassify them or not. He didn't have the right to have them in his possession. That's the crime. And he has no defense to that. But these people throw up any kind of smokescreen they can come up with, including the Presidential Records Act, National Archives, not a crime, declassification, if he thinks about it, which is nonsense. But even if it were true, that doesn't get him out of the Espionage Act. And here's the one thing I really loved. He says, well, who do we prosecute under the Espionage Act? We prosecuted Eric Ames, who gave secrets to the Soviet Union. We prosecuted, and it goes on, a number of 2 or 3 other people, high-profile people, who got prosecuted on the Espionage Act. What he's saying, and this is just being a slimy lawyer, is that the Espionage Act requires taking national security information and passing it on to a foreign government. Now, that's not the requirement of the law at all. But by saying these are the kinds of cases that we prosecute, he's saying that's a sine qua non. That is a requirement to be in violation of the Espionage Act. And it's not. Read the Espionage Act, folks. Don't take my word for it. These things are easily found on Google. The Espionage Act is referenced in detail in this indictment, just as the Presidential Records Act is easily found on Google. And there he goes again. He really doesn't like it when I criticize his new idol, Bob Graham. I'm going to have to pause again. I really apologize for this. Oh, wait a minute. He's barking in the other room now. Maybe he's not interrupting. And I'm almost finished anyway, which I guess is what he's trying to tell me is to shut up, Dowie. You're talking too much. I get that a lot. Not just from him. But we don't need to go there because I don't want to republish all the personal insults I receive on a regular basis from all of you. So, bottom line is, stop the nonsense, check the facts, read the allegations, read the Espionage Act, read the Presidential Records Act, and you will see that these people are talking nonsense. But you know what? All those Republicans out there who believe what they want to believe, they're not reading these documents. They're not paying attention to details. They're just listening to what they hear and believing what they want to believe. And that's unfortunate.